All right, so we're going through Sri Nisargadatta's I Am That. We're on chapter 38. Spiritual practice is will asserted and reasserted, which is an interesting idea. I guess will asserted and reasserted until there's no more will, and then you're home. So he starts off this morning. He's got this big question. I don't know that it's always the same questioner, but he quite often outlines his perspective quite nicely as he lines up his question for, excuse me, Sri Nisargadatta. And he says this morning, the Westerners who occasionally come to see you are faced with a peculiar difficulty. The very notion of a liberated man, a realized man, a self-knower, a God-knower, a man beyond world, is unknown to them. All they have in their Christian culture is the idea of a saint, a pious man, law-abiding, God-fearing, fellow-loving, prayerful, sometimes prone to ecstasies and confirmed by a few miracles. The very idea of a Jnani is foreign to Western culture, something exotic and rather unbelievable. Even when his existence is accepted, he is looked at with suspicion as a case of self-induced euphoria caused by a strange physical postures and mental attitudes. The very idea of a new dimension in consciousness seems to them implausible and improbable. What will help them is the opportunity of hearing a Jnani relate his own experience of realization, its causes and beginnings, its progresses and attainments, and its actual practice in daily life. Much of what he says may remain strange, even meaningless, yet there will remain a feeling of reality, an atmosphere of actual experiencing, ineffable, yet very real, a center from which an exemplary life can be lived. All right, any arguments with any of that as Westerners? Do you think that's true? Has that been your experience with your Vedanta that you, of course, we don't get to see a whole lot of enlightened souls, but you know that it is rather inaccessible from our cultural perspective, and certainly a Christianity, I think all the Christian traditions set up a certain amount of skepticism, if not outright abuse of folks that have come forward enlightened or have seen a unity or seen a oneness. Quite often get attacked for that. So it is an odd perspective for us. It is a different perspective. And even our questioner, I started chuckling there at the end because he's telling an enlightened soul what's going to be helpful for the Westerners in his crowd, which is very Western in and of itself, you know. Well, this is how you should do it. This is the way you should do it for us. But he says, hearing a Jnani relate his own experience of realization. Well, realization is not an experience, right? So, of course, immediately we're going to try and put our perspective, cultural perspective on this thing, on spiritual life, which for all of us, regardless of whether you're from the West or the East, every culture has its bias that unless you are very keen on your own awareness, your own personal awareness, you're not going to know how you're affected by that culture. It's just an assumption on our part, a place that we act from. And so we don't even see our biases, you know. And so he here is asking, relate your own experience with realization, your experience of realization. Seems like a good question, but it's got a very deep assumption that is false, because realization is the only effect that has no cause. It is always a matter of grace. Even in the realm of Advaita, it is a matter of grace. That there is no one to remove that last straw of individuality from you in order to allow this universal understanding, this universal perspective. And so in all of it, it is a matter of grace and has to be a matter of grace. Now that grace, what is the source of that grace? For the Jnani, it's his own self, right? Just like the Divine Mother says, she says, the grace of God is easily attained, but the grace of one's own mind is difficult indeed. And for us, it's getting our mind to let go of our karma. You see, we often think that there's a man in the sky out there who's keeping track of our do-gooders and bad doers, or who's naughty and nice, right? And keeping accounts of our karma up there. When in fact, that's not true at all. The keeper of your karma is you. It's your own mind. And it's your own mind that won't allow you to realize God in this moment until you take care of that somehow. And that karma is never going to go away in our mind, in the sense that there's nothing that we can make it go away with. Any good that we do would be only acting at the 0 point, right? That would be acting true to our nature. That's what we should have always been doing. If we live a perfect life, we've just kept a zero total, in there. Once we've dipped below that 0, there's no way to make it up. Any positive karma that we do, doesn't replace the negative karma that we've done. It just kind of balances us out in the space that we're in at that moment. And so we have to find a way of being released from our own mind. And that grace has to come, either the grace of our own self, if you perceive it that way, or the grace of God or the divine, if you perceive it that way. But that is the only thing that allows you to walk away from your karma, is that understanding, no, I'm not the mind. And this pesky thing is in the mind. I'm renouncing it. I'm renouncing it and walking away from it. And you say, oh, well, if you're allowed to do that, why don't we just all do it? Well, because you won't let yourself do it. Watch your mind, and see how it works. It's always the first one to argue against your realization. There's always a reason that you're not allowed to feel good about yourself right now. There's always a reason that you can't just let that go, because there's always some payment that has to be induced somewhere along the way. So he's putting all of that in his question here, without really knowing it himself. He says it's causes and its beginnings. Well, we've just talked about that. There are no causes, and if there's no causes, there's no beginnings. It's progress and attainments. Well, it's not an attainment, and it's not a progress. And it's actual practice in daily life. Well, there is no actual practice of daily life for a Jnani. He's always in the moment, and the moment always provides him with everything necessary to navigate it perfectly, without having a single thought about it, without having a single calculation about it. His awareness of his nature of Satchitananda, of divine love, of an infinite wisdom, is the only guide that he needs. And he is that. And so every moment for the Jnani is spontaneous. It's unaffected by story. All story is egoism, and that's what traps us, because we can't see the moment. If we could see the moment, we would see God and be in ecstasy. That's why Ramakrishna several times a day was popping out of out of normal consciousness into ecstasy, because he was clearly seeing the divine, clearly seeing the real nature of the universe. And it was just too much for the senses, too much for the mind. So it shorts them out, and you just go there directly. In a state of isness. And so his question, even though it seems to us very, very reasonable, for a Jnani, you're going to see when Maharaj answers him, he says, well, the experience might be incommunicable. Can one communicate an experience? And this, what he's trying to say here is because for us in normal life, that's all we can do is communicate experience. So for us, that's an odd question. Oh, well, what do you mean? Of course I can communicate an experience. But this isn't true. If you've ever had a divine vision or a divine experience, you'll find that that in that experience, that things don't come through sentences. Things don't come through words. When you deal with the divine, oh boy, this is going to open up a whole lecture separate from the book here. But when I'm talking to you right now, it's quite a clunky thing, because I'm having lots of ideas in my mind, experiences that I've had that are very vivid. And all I can do is come up with some funky sound to give you. And then you have to take that sound, which contains nothing of what created it. It just, all I can give you is the sound. And then you take that sound and you have to project all of your own experiences on it to try and come up with an understanding. That's normal life. if you've ever had in a spiritual experience, that doesn't happen. That communication is dropped into you, in the sense that say in your spiritual vision, you have your guru appear, and your guru tells you something, gives you 2 words, says it's okay, for instance, which can happen, right? In normal life, I give you those 2 words, that's all you've got. Now you're on your own to figure out what it means that it's okay. If those same words come to you in a spiritual vision, they come with everything that your teacher included in their formation. It comes and it's dropped into you. And your sensation of that is that you've always known this. How come I never saw that before? How could I not have thought that? And you'll get the depth of it. It'll hit you absolutely, because it's instantly integrated into the self, into you as a whole, into your story as a whole. Right? And so he's saying, Maharaj, who lives in this state where he's constantly getting the full picture from the universe itself, from whatever, however you want to refer to that. I'm a bhakta, so I always say, oh, that's God, the universe is God. So if I do that, that's what I'm saying, that the universe itself is the ultimate reality. Not, but you are that ultimate reality, but you've got a universe that you're hanging out in for some reason. So the experience is incommunicable. He's saying, that's not really a way for me to say this. I can give you the words, but you're not going to have any of the stuff that created them. And, I don't know how to get that to you, really, in that sense. He says, can one communicate an experience? And the questioner says, well, yes, if one is an artist. The essence of art is communication of feeling, of experience, right? Which really speaks to the impossibility of it, that we've had to resort to a third-party tool, whether it's poetry or painting or music, in order to try and express the experience of being, right? The experience of isness, because there is no way to express this. Sri Nisargadatta, in one of his other places here in the book, he says the major difference between a realized soul and a deluded soul is that a deluded soul always describes himself from the outside in, whereas the realized soul always goes from the inside out. And which is an amazing experience, because it's true, right? If I ask you to tell me about yourself, every one of us in here is going to start from the outside in. Oh, well, I'm a man, or I'm a woman. I'm this age. I grew up in this country. Right? So it's all the externals coming in. And the challenge is, for you as a spiritual seeker, describe yourself from the inside out. That's a marvelous exercise to do, because immediately you run into infinities. Immediately you run into silence, into... I remember, actually I remember because it was only like a couple of years ago, when I first started trying to go inward in a different way than just thinking. Most of my life, when I've gone inward, I thought that meant, oh, go in and think, right? That's what that means. And anytime I closed my eyes, my inner world was sort of just, this red hue of nothingness. There's nothing in here. What are they all talking about? And this changed, in my own experience, changed just not that long ago, like within the last 2 years, where I decided that can't be the sum total of my inner world, just, the red that I see when I close my eyes and thinking. And so I thought, well, let's take something realistic. Let's say the idea that I'm not the body. All right, well, I can say I'm not the body from the outside in, but what is the experience of body from the inside out? And so I went in and started focusing on the experience of body. I was like, wow, look at all these disparate sensations. It's not a unity. You feel your hands, you feel wherever you place your attention. You become aware of it, but you're not aware of everything at once. And so the body is these little spurts of sensation that come to you intimately from the inside. And then you have to know, I'm not the mind. And so then you have to understand, okay, if I'm not the body and I'm not the mind, first of all, what am I? Right? And that's when you become aware that you're the observer. The mind has to tell you what mood it's in. It has to tell you what state it's in. The body has to tell you whether it's sick or not, or whether you feel good or not. And it literally reports to you. Literally will say, no, I'm in a bad mood, and this caused it, and this is what's behind that, and the body feels this way this morning, right? But it's all reporting to you. And so you become instantly aware, well, gosh, if something is reporting to me, if I'm observing this thing, by necessity, it's not me, because it wouldn't have to report to me if it was me. It wouldn't have to describe a state to me if it was me. And so you start paying attention to that inner world, and at some point you'll drop below mind, which means you'll stop thinking. And that's when the reality begins. That's when the fun begins, because it's only in that silence that you can know who you are. If anything is telling you who you are, it cannot be true. It simply cannot be true. Because there's three triads that are necessary for the mind to conceive of something: time, space, and causation. Now, all three of these triads could be the same triad described differently, but the three ways I've run into it is, time, space, causation. Time belongs to mind. Space belongs to mind. Causation belongs to mind. Without mind, those things do not exist. They are not necessary. They are merely tools for dealing with the singularity, as it were. We look at this singularity, this one without a second, and what can you do with the one without a second? Well, nothing, except disappear into it. And so how do we manipulate it? Well, that's what the body-mind is all about. The body initially takes this singularity and chops it into 5 pieces for you: a taste, a smell, a feeling, a hearing, whatever the 5 senses are. Breaks it into those 5 senses and hands it to the mind. Well, the mind takes these 5 disparate pieces of information, and its knowledge is of an intuitive oneness. So what does it do? It takes these 5 pieces of information and starts linking them together in relativity, saying, well, this one's related to that one, and this one's related to that one. And what is the mind actually doing? It's trying to recreate an intuitive singularity with multiplicity. So the mind's job is to constantly look at this singularity, break it into its pieces, and then reconstruct that singularity in its mind through relativity. These things are all related, and eventually we're going to find that oneness. So we get caught on the inside with that. And so this is the reason that to express the experience of being, we need an artist. We need music. We need a dance. We need something that can do what language cannot do. Because we mentioned the 3 triads. One is time, space, causation. One is past, present, and future. And one is subject, object, verb. Right. So those three trinities are necessary for the mind. They're all tools of the mind. And they are the reason that the mind can operate within a singularity, even though there's nothing to operate in a singularity. And so he's bringing that to light. He says, can experience be communicated? And the questioner says, well, yes, if you're an artist. The essence of art is communication of feeling, of experience. The Maharaj then says, well, to receive this communication, you've got to be receptive, right? It's got to be something you're interested in hearing. Otherwise, it's just going to fall the way of everything else. Like right now, what your big toe is trying to tell you wasn't at all obvious to you until this moment when I mentioned it. Everybody thought of their big toe. Oh yeah, it is a little sore. Look at that. But it's all that stuff is there. But see, we never take it all in at once. The realized soul does. The realized soul has no attachment. To have no attachment means that you take everything in at once at the same level, completely open to everything and aware of everything simultaneously. In egoism's all about boundary, right? Egoism is all about description. Egoism is what makes us a manageable, imagined figment in this unity that we're actually experiencing. And so he says, of course, but they have to be a receiver. And the questioner says, well, if the transmitter doesn't transmit, of what use is the receiver? Maharaj, well, the Jnani belongs to all. He gives himself tirelessly and completely to whoever comes to him. If he is not a giver, he is not a Jnani. Whatever he has, he shares. right? So a knower is going to be somebody that's always fully present with you, because they have no agenda. There is no limitation for them. And they live in a world where the very first lesson they realized was there's nothing to get here. It's impossible. This world is a dream. And I can build a house in a dream, but I'm still going to wake up homeless if I went to bed homeless. You know, it's like I can go to the ocean, but if I live in Colorado, that's where I'll wake up. So they understand, the Gyani understands by his nature that this world is nothing to be taken. So the Gyani is never self-concerned, not because he's unselfish, it's because he knows there's nothing to be taken. This is a dream world. I am the source of everything I see. This is all my reflection. To live in this world with the thought of getting something from it is like trying to fall in love with the mirror, right? And I don't know if anybody's kissed a mirror, but it's not satisfying. You realize very quickly there's nothing there for me. And so this is the nature of this world. There's nothing here for you. If you're out there trying to find security, trying to find love, trying to find strength, trying to find anything in this world, we're still working on the very first lesson. You come into this world with nothing, and you will leave this world with nothing. So whoever thought that the point of being here was to get something didn't pay attention to the first and last lesson, right? So there's nothing here for you. There is no story for the Gyani. There's no past, there's no future. There's only isness, this eternal now. And if you think about it, ironically, there's no space for thought in the now, right? You see how brittle this reality, this perceived reality is. When did this moment ever exist, right? If you believe in a past and a future, you can't believe in the moment. Because where does the past become the moment before it becomes the past, or the future become the moment before it becomes the past? You see, it's infinitesimally small in there. There can't be a present if you believe in a future and a past. And if you believe in a present, there can be no future and no past. Where are they? Have you ever experienced a past? No. Have you ever experienced a future? No. Can you bring any evidence of either of them? No, you can't. The mind will tell stories and create stories to create a past and to project a future, right? But they are always based on a misunderstanding, right? And that misunderstanding is that that there is a past and a future. And so this is why egoism becomes such a problem, because when we take a particular and identify with it, meaning a body and mind, immediately what happens is story, right? Because then you start collecting things in your mind, things that you are attached to, right? All the things that you enjoy in a day that you didn't want to forget. What do? Well, first of all, nowadays we take a picture of it, right? Pull our phone out and snap a picture, because we don't want it to go away. We're resisting the natural flow of the universe, right? So anytime we take a recording, or I record a class, ironically, we're fighting the natural flow. We're trying to attach. We're trying to hold on to something. And whenever we're trying to hold on to an attachment, what do? Well, we want to share our own intuitive immortality with it, right? We are the only thing that goes through, that transcends time, as it were. So we stuff it in our memory. We hold on to these things, put them in our memory, and they become story. They become parts of an imagined reality. And if you've ever had the opportunity to go back and verify one of your memories, like I did when I was in my early 20s, I grew up in Germany, and I went back and looked up my old friends, and I took a walk with my very best friend in the world, Brigitte, who I had not seen at that point in almost 20 years. And we went for this walk down this road that we had ridden our bikes on and played many games on when I was a kid. And we started talking about our friendship. And I had a life-changing experience with her that day, because I realized that our pasts are 100% manufactured. Because she and I had two separate sets of memories about our relationship, very few of which were even remembered by the other, you know? And it wasn't until she started telling me about something that I'm like, oh, yeah, sort of remember that. And I realized that the way I described our relationship and the things that were important to me in that relationship and the whole idea of that relationship was radically different from her, even though we experienced the same relationship. Completely different history, completely different happenings, completely different things that were important. And you see, egoism does that. Egoism takes this world and sets up all of the boundaries based on the senses, based on memory, right? And all that happens is that from there, it keeps it going because it takes a sensation from the moment, applies it to a memory, and creates expectation. That's what a desire is. Right? And so when you go into your internal world and you start paying attention to yourself as the observer, not getting caught up in what the mind is thinking about, but watching how it thinks, right? Not getting caught up in how the body feels, but watching how it feels. And then seeing these two disparate objects, the body and the mind, and how they talk to each other. How do they communicate with each other? And you see how they mix together, just like that idea. Sri Nisargadatta actually points that out. He says, what is desire? Desire is the senses bringing up a memory and attaching an expectation of pleasure to it. And that's how it works. And you can see that happen long before it actually forms the desire. And that's, as a spiritual seeker, that's where you want to live. You want to live at that level of awareness, that level of discernment in your mind, because once that desire has already become a desire, to fight it at that point, it's a full-grown adult, knight in shining armor at that point. You're not going to beat that thing. And if you give it much more time, it goes in and collects all of its other thoughts and memories of this same pleasure. And soon you're in what's called a state of mind, which means a reality. And you can't see over the edge of that bowl. That's like depression. If you're in a depressed state, you don't think it's ever going to get better. You don't think that life's ever going to change. This state seems like the way it is, and I'm stuck here. And so this is one of the reasons that we want to go internally and become the observer and know the internal world. This is where it's infinite, not there. This is where it resolves, not there. This is where you are, not there. This is where the moment is, not there. And so when you go inside and you begin finding out that your world inside is actually infinite and that it's only in silence before mind, that you are not your thoughts, that your thoughts are incidental. They don't even apply to you. They have nothing to do with you. It's your attachment to them that gives you that belief that this thought has something to do with me. And that interest in that being about you is what keeps your mind active. That's why your mind is so noisy, because you still think it's your story. You still think it's who you are and that there's something to be learned there, which is an irony. Because what is the thinker going to think that the listener doesn't know, since they are both sourced in the same person, right? And so this duality that we live in, boy, I'm just riffing here, sorry. This duality that we live in is not an external duality of multiplicity. It's an internal duality of the thinker and the listener, right? Thinking that because I'm thinking, I'm going to learn something, I'm going to understand something more. But that understanding comes intuitively through the silence, through the wisdom that's natively yours. It's not with this process of relative reduction that the mind is engaged in all the time, of trying to tie things together into an imagined or perceived, probably imagine's a better word, of this unity, right? And so this one without a second has to happen inside first. You have to heal this wound of a thinker and a listener and bring it back to a singularity, which is only possible in the moment. And it's the natural state in a moment, because in the moment, there is no time to conceive of a thought. By the time you've conceived of a thought and thought of it, you're no longer in the moment. All of those things are distractions, right? So most of us, most of the time, are sitting on the very edge of the past and looking at the moment. And that edge of the past is memory. That edge of the past is ego. It's our story. It's the summary of all of our thoughts at that moment. And we sit in that place and we look at the moment and we interpret it according to this bag of memories. excuse me, that we've conjured and put together. And that's the reason we can't see God, if this wasn't an Advaita class, or the inherent reality, the divine reality, however you want to refer to that. We can't see it because we're looking at it through story. We're looking at it through egoism, and egoism and the veil of Maya are the same, not two different things. Your ego is the reason that you cannot see God, that you cannot see the divine reality. And so all of that, when they say be here now, it seems like a very obvious thing and we all want to run out and do it, immediately, but we have no idea how to do it because we'll try and do it, right? It's not something that's done. It's an absolute pure isness. You've never done anything else, but you have to stop being interested in everything else and come to that silent moment, because in the moment, there's only silence. There's only peace, because there's no story that can disturb your story. There's no external thing that can disturb you, because there is no external thing, right? And so you be in this moment, and in that silence, you know who you are. As soon as you try and put that into language, you'll be without words, because you can't be described. You are an experience of being, right? Cannot be described. So the Gyani belongs to all. A Gyani in this room, he's right here with everybody. He has nothing to take, no concern for himself. He's aware of everything at once. He knows what that divine light that's shining in the back of your head. He can see that light. He knows the nature of that light. He knows that that light and he are the same thing. And he sees the personality that comes out the front. And he can tell you the entire sum of stories that is happening in between those 2 points. So that's how these great gurus, these great illuminaries can look at you and see you, because they know the you that's real, the light that is that Satchitananda, that as it were is shining in the back of your head, and they see what you're producing from it coming out the front, and they can tell you everything that you've done in between to create that personality out of that universal self, to create this particularity out of that universal. So he's saying so he's here. Whatever he has, he shares. The questioner, but can he share what he is? Right? Can he do that? Maharaj, you mean, can he make others into Gyanis? Well, yes and no. No, since Gyanis are not made, right? If they were made, that means that there was a cause for their enlightenment. Gyanis are not made. They realize themselves as such when they return to their source, their real nature. I cannot make you into what you already are. All I can tell you is the way I traveled and invite you to take it. The questioner says, well, this does not answer my question. I have in mind the critical and skeptical Westerners who denies the very possibility of higher states of consciousness. Recently, drugs have made a breach in his disbelief without affecting his materialistic outlook. Drugs or no drugs, the body remains the primary fact and the mind is secondary. Beyond the mind, they see nothing. From Buddha onwards, the state of self-realization was described in negative terms as not this, not that. Is it inevitable? Is it not possible to illustrate it, if not describe? I admit no verbal description will do, when the state described is beyond words. Yet it is also within words. Poetry is the art of putting into words the inexpressible. Okay, there's lots of stuff in there that we could pull out and talk about for fun. But the major one is look at how much story is involved in his question. What does he know of every Westerner? What does he know of even one Westerner? Right? And this is what we have to be very careful about, especially in these days and times. And that is this idea of other. There is no other. And you may think that you know what Americans think. You may think you know what Indians think. You may think what Democrats think or what Republicans think. What do you really know about that? Almost nothing. And what you do know about them came from somebody else who knows just as little about that other group as you did. But just like you, is forming a billion opinions about it and forming stories left and right about it, right? Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll bring up something to discuss. My meditation changed a lot in the last year, in that I just pay attention to everything, including the story, including being in the story. And that's part of the process.
Mhm.
You know, I'm sitting here, my breath goes in and out. I'm paying attention to that. It's very beautiful, and in and out, in and out. And then suddenly I realize I've been thinking about my income taxes for the last 5 minutes, and that's okay. And then I beat up on myself. I say, well, you're lazy. You're meditating wrong. That's okay. And another voice says, you're a wonderful person. Look how deep and profound you are, because you notice you are following your thoughts, and that's just arises and passes away. I'm less inclined to think there's anything wrong with anything, and more inclined to just sit and pay attention.
Yes.
So there.
Perfect. That's exactly right. Because the only thing keeping you interested is attachment. That idea that this is me, or this has something to do with me, that those income taxes are actually mine, right? Which, within a story they are, but outside of that story, who cares? Right? But so yes, our idea is not to be attached to anything, right? To have no attachment, to accept everything simultaneously as it is. Not to create a story out of it, not to add a story to it, not to measure it, not to come up with any relative idea between this body mind and that idea or that thought. And Nisargadatta says, a woman came to him and said, I can't meditate. My mind is so noisy. It's always so active. And he said, she says, what can I do? And he says, well, become disinterested. It says your mind is only noisy because you're interested in it. You want it to tell you stories. You want it to be busy. Stop wanting or being interested in what the mind is doing, and it will stop. It will silence itself, And so come to that place. But just the way that egoism works is that it creates story upon story upon story. And it's very helpful to go through a period of time to think about, what things do I believe? What things do I think? What of them are actually story, and what of them are real? And how are you going to measure what is real? How are you going to decide whether something is a story or whether it's real? And this is the thing. What do you actually know? You know very little. I did a exercise, I don't know, my 6th year in the monastery, I guess. I was sitting in the shrine one day, and I thought to myself, I was like, is there something that I know that doesn't depend on anything else that I know? Because I wanted to get rid of this idea of relativity. I was like, is it true that everything I know is relative, that it always depends on something else to be true? Is there anything that I know that doesn't depend on anything else to be true? And of course, I found out that experiment had already been done almost successfully with Descartes. Of course, he got it backwards, though, but which is kind of funny, because Nisargadatta talks about him. He says, I think, therefore I am, right? That is the fundamental thing. But see, he made the fundamental mistake. He thought his thinking was his existence. There's a stage before that, the I am, the isness. So it should have been, I am, therefore I think. It shouldn't be, I think, therefore I am, in that sense. And so to sit there, because that's the only thing that that doesn't depend on anything else that I am, right? And exactly what that means, you don't know. What that is, who knows? But you are. That's the thing. So Maharaj says, in response to this whole story, he says, there is no lack of religious poets. Turn to them for what you want. As far as I'm concerned, my teaching is simple. Trust me for a while and do what I tell you. If you persevere, you will find that your trust was justified. Right? He says in another place, because this questioner asks him at one point, he's like, well, what's the difference between you and me? You're sitting here, you're enlightened. I can't figure out anything. What's the difference? Why are you there and I'm here? And he said, really, the difference between you and I is only one. He said, when my teacher told me that I am that, I believed it. You thought you had something else to figure out. You thought you still had something else to do. I just believed him. And that made all the difference, you know? And so this is that karma thing. I was sitting in a library, well, a devotee's house actually, but it was in their library with Swami Prabhutananda. And they would, the whole room, floor to ceiling, all the way around, plus some jutting out bookshelves of books, books and books and books, more than I'd ever seen in someone's private home. So Swami and I were sitting in a little bench in the middle of the room, kind of looking around, waiting for the devotee to show up. And I just commented, I was like, Maharaj, look at all these books. This is amazing. And he smiled. He said, yes, but that's not what's amazing. He says, what's amazing is that he will only read the ones that his karma allows. Right? You can own all the books in the world that you want, but you will only read the ones that your karma allows you to read. Right? And who is your karma? You are your karma. You are your karma. Your idea of yourself is your karma. The story of what you are is your karma. And it's completely fabricated. There's no reality to it. It's whatever is useful in the moment. Sometimes there's some consistency to it, but most of that consistency is a lie. It's an agreed upon lie that you tell yourself to navigate this world in ignorance, right? Because what can we do in this world? What can we do? We're born into something we don't understand, have no idea what's going on, don't know what the objectives are, don't know what we're supposed to be doing, don't even know what this thing is, how it all works. We have to be taught how to use it. It takes us 7 months to realize that our toes are our toes, right? What can we do in a world like that? Questioner says, well, what to do with people who are interested but can't trust? Maharaj, well, if they could stay with me, they would come to trust me. Once they trust me, they'll follow my advice and discover the rest for themselves. So that trust always has to be there. That's why I say as Vedantins, when we discuss spiritual life with people, the last thing we need to do is tell them what we think, right? The vast majority of our conversation with people is questioning so that we can find out what they think, so that we can find out where they're sitting, so that we can learn to worship in the same way that they're worshiping, with the same depth and the same meaning that they're experienced. And that whole effort of finding that out about them will build the trust and the respect that's necessary for any learning to happen in that relationship. And learning is never one way. Teaching and students are, again, a division of egoism. Anytime there's a class, learning is going both ways, always. Anytime you're sitting with a teacher, learning is going both ways, always. And that's one of the keys to humility, is to come to understand that and use that. You're always a student. If Thakur himself says, every day I'm a student, I learn something every day. If Thakur, a divine incarnation, considers himself a student, where's the teacher? Where is the teacher? And so that's the whole point. This is why it all has to come down to grace, because if it wasn't grace, it would add to egoism. If you could actually attain realization, you would be one of the proudest people in the world, one of the most arrogant people in the world. Look what I've done. Look at this unique, incredible position I've attained. But these enlightened souls are not egotists. They're servants, they're lovers. How does that happen? Because they realize in the end, it's grace. There are no teachers. There are only students in the manifest, right? The teacher is behind the screen. Yes.
I'll hit you with one of my big questions about what you're talking about. So it's the thing, should people, or is it valuable for people to talk about their meditation experiences or not? And the pluses and minuses, well, if you talk about your meditation experience, your ego is more likely to get involved in it. you can become arrogant and competitive. You know, people try to outdo each other and describing their blissful awakenings. That's a problem. That's probably the biggest problem. And then also, like you said, it can't be put into words. So those are the reasons not to talk about it. The reasons to talk about it is just the reason that you share your experience in anything with people, and you would get to understand it better. I remember at a point, I thought, that I was a dismal failure as a meditator because my mind wandered. And it was only as I talked to other people that I realized that just about everybody's mind wanders. And then there was a time that I thought I was a big deal because I'd had some awakening experience. And then in talking to people, I realized an awful lot of people have some awakening experiences. So those are the pluses and minuses. And I'm still undecided, and I'm curious what you think.
Well, just a moment. There's a couple of things to that, in the sense that there are no rules. It's always a matter of principles. And so for some people, it'll be very helpful to hear, and for some people, it'll be very helpful to tell. And to be wise in that is to be a person of practice, so that you can discern. The first danger is what you say. It's becoming proud. The way that Swami Prabhupada expressed it to me is, he said to me, he says, if you have a spiritual experience, he says that adds a significant amount of spiritual energy to you as a self. And he says, you can do lots of things with that spiritual energy. That spiritual energy can take you to higher states of consciousness. That extra energy can express as sex. It can express as many forms of pleasure or thinking. He says, and you can go telling people and crystallize it into egoism. So you get a choice of what you do with the energies, the gifts that have been given to you through your spiritual experiences. And so you, as the holder of those, have to guard the heart that holds them and know whether or not you're telling this for the betterment of that other person or to make sure they know that you've had one. And so if you are doing your discernment and you can go inside and you can say, no, I don't care if he knows this, it doesn't change anything, but I think it might be helpful to him, then by all means. That's why the scriptures say with like-minded people, you can share those things. People who know it's not a matter of egoism, and people who know it would be ridiculous for it to be a matter of egoism, because what did you have to do with getting that experience, right? But see, that's the weird thing about egoism. It doesn't matter. People get egotistical about the way they look. What did you have to do with that? What skill did you have to become beautiful? Or some people get egotistical about the ability to sing. Once again, it's like, great, you got a nice voice. What did you have to do with that? And so this is the trick. So there's not a yes or no to what you're saying. It's just discern inwardly very carefully before you share those things and know yourself. Am I in danger of egoism? Does my mind just want this person to know this? Or is this truly going to be helpful? Or take the next route and hand it to God. Say, I'm doing this in front of you, Lord, take care of me. And then don't worry about it either way, right? I've heard arguments about whether you should give money to homeless people or not. One camp says, no, you shouldn't give them money. If they spend it on drugs, that's your karma. You enabled that drug and you're going to die for it. Right. And then someone says, yeah, but then if they starve to death, that's also your karma. You didn't do anything about it. What do you do? What do you do? Well, what you do is you do what the scriptures say to do. Worship God. Hand that homeless man your $5 and say, here, Thakur, here, Jesus, here, Buddha, here, Rama. Please spend this wisely for yourself. And then walk away. And what happens is no longer your karma. You gave that money to the divine and put it in the responsibility of the divine, and that goes forward. Right? So for you, think of God, think of the divine, think of your highest nature. Worship in everything that you do, And then you don't have to worry about this silly thing called karma, you know, which is not a thing. It's an idea.
Yeah, I was just going to say, some of my teachers from various traditions have recommended or told not to talk about meditation experiences, in part because if you have a higher experience, you might, lose the power or wisdom or whatever gained from that. So that's what I've been told.
Yeah, it's very much in line with that idea. It's like, that is true. Ramakrishna, there was a young, I leave it to your belief or not belief in this story, but they were all walking at night in the dark, and this young man, very odd spiritual power that he had this ability to emanate light from his back, from one of the chakras in his back. And so he and Thakur and a couple of the other disciples were walking home from a devotee's house there in Dakshineshwar, and they were in the woods in the dark. And so the guy turns around, lifts his shirt, and lights the way. And when they get to where they're going, Thakur takes the gift away. Thakur runs his hand over him and takes the gift away from the person. And so what you say is true in that. But it's not, if we didn't know about them, then we would have no knowledge of spiritual experience. We would have no knowledge of realization if somebody wasn't willing to say something.
Well, I mean, and in a realized person, yeah, but not every Tom, Dick, and Harry.
No, it's true. Yeah. And I don't argue with that. I think it's dangerous to share those things. But I also think that it's marvelously encouraging to those things, to share those things. Of course, the thing is that the person has to be ready to hear them, and they have to have that amount of trust. And if they've already got all of that, really, what's the value? They can go to the scriptures and get those same stories and get even greater ones than that. So yeah, I think it's great to be very, very cautious about it. But I don't think it's prohibitive, and I don't think it's guaranteed negativity either. I think that it can be positive, and there are some people who are not so egotistically inclined that it's problematic. Yes.
I just have a question. Can someone have a spiritual experience or awareness experience and not catch it, or is that just lack of attention? Is it possible to miss an experience?
I would say that's what normal life is.
I do it all the time.
Yeah, that's all we're doing. We're misunderstanding everything consistently, so that we have a framework that we can work in. Yeah, no, it's definitely possible to miss it, and I really do think that that's the normal thing. We are living in the divine. We have to be missing something to have made it mundane. To have made it to the point where we question the existence of existence, right? Because that's the funny thing.
We were talking about it as far as sharing things. I'm very much into an author named Byron Katie, and she talks about the work and that basically everything is a story.
Mm-hmm.
And even if we share something, it's a story.
Yes.
It's nothing more than a story. So I can share a story, and somebody in this room could say, oh, that's his ego. Somebody else could say, oh, that was wonderful. Someone else could say, oh, that was encouraging. It was just a story.
Yes.
We'll all do with it what we're going to do with it.
That's
And when Brother Shankar was around, something had happened to me. He was running a class, and I had a very powerful experience. And I brought it back to the class, and I made it clear when I started telling the story, this is not about ego. This was a powerful experience I had that I just want to share it with you, and do with it what you're going to do. I'm not responsible what you do with, anything. And what you said about the ego, of how it's interesting that people will say, oh, I have an ego because I'm attractive or I sing. Well, you had nothing to do with it. My shaman teacher once said to me, ego is not only thinking more of yourself, but it's also thinking less of yourself. that's also ego, because ego sees itself as separate. So whether you see yourself as better than others or less than, you're still an ego.
Yes.
And I thought that was an interesting thing. So you said a lot of interesting things today. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's good insight. That is very true. Because there's really, I mean, there is no internal, external, right? It's like without just of course, everybody on screen is going to roll their eyes as soon as I start going down this road, because this is my favorite thing. You know, the unreality of this world is quite obvious to the person paying attention. You know, the fact that you have never seen the outside world. You have no idea. You know, you look at that light, pick a light and look at it. What are you seeing? You're saying, oh, I'm seeing that light. Are you? That light is hitting the back of your eyeball. That light's not going any farther than that. It's going to hit those cones back there, and those cones are going to interpret it into biochemical information. And that information is going to be transmitted to your mind, to the brain, or wherever it's transmitted, we assume to the brain. And then that brain creates a symbol based on that information. You have never seen anything but the symbol of that light. It is impossible for you to see that light directly, right? And so it is with everything, right? And so how is that different from a dream? You know, in a dream, you could be sitting in this very same room. Every one of you could be here. I could be here. All the lights would be here. And we could see them in as much detail as we see them now. We could even go up and change a light bulb. We could take the light bulb apart and see how it's made. All in a dream, right? And so that's what they're saying. That's what the sages are saying. This world is like a dream. The only thing that captures us is the story that we make up by attachment, right? That's why Thakur needed some form of attachment to embody, right? To enter into the dream, he needed some form of attachment. So he would always say, "Oh, give me a glass of water," or "I want a jalebi." Right, to bring him down from those higher states. It's because this is not a world, this is a mind. And the only difference between this mind and your mind is that this is the universal mind that we're in. This is God's dream, where God is aware that he or she or that has become every single one of us in this dream. But when you and I dream, we're convinced that we've only become one thing in that dream. We don't dream with the awareness that I'm the mountains, I'm the flowers, I'm all the people in this dream. Even in our normal dream, we pick a particular perspective from which to experience that dream, even though that dream is 100% made of the one mind, our section of the universal mind, right? And so this world that we live in here is not a world. You live in a mind. And that's why Jesus can say something as ridiculous as, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, get up and throw yourself into the sea. And verily, I tell you the truth, this mountain will get up and throw itself into the sea. How could Jesus say that if this was a world that we lived in? Unless he produced some magnificent exception, right, to the reality. But it's not. It's like what Vivekananda says, there are no miracles. Everything obeys the rules of the divine, but you don't know the nature of the system that you live in. You assume it's material, so mountains can't throw themselves in the sea. But know the nature of this world.
Yes.
That's what faith is. Faith is knowing the nature of this world, knowing what you know that you brought into this world.
What?
Yes. Oop, Lydia, can you mute? Oops, nope, she can't. All right. What was that? Yes, sir.
The concluding sentence in chapter 34 of I Am That is undeceive yourself and be free.
Yes.
Is there anything he's not saying in there? Is that just I call it a zinger.
Well, yeah, that's the same token as know yourself. You know, who are you? The answer to that question and that stop deceiving yourself are the same. You know, to not deceive yourself, you have to discern what's real and what's not real. And Thakur gives us the only thing we need to know to do that. He says, if it changes, it's unreal. If it's not changing, that alone is real. And that's what we're hoping to find when we go inside, when we stop, when we notice, study how the mind affects you, study how the body affects you, study who you are if you're not the body and mind, observe all of it. And then as a last step, put awareness on awareness itself. And that's the final step. Because that awareness is the only thing that doesn't change within you. That awareness is you. Yeah. So don't tell any stories. That's what I tell people. Just don't formulate a conscious story about yourself. I stop people quite a bit. When somebody starts off a question like, "Oh, it's so difficult for me to meditate." I'm like, well, of course it is. You've defined it that way. You've just said it's difficult for me to meditate. If you give yourself a story, you have to live it. That's the nature of this experience in this world. So stop it with the stories.
Even if the story is, I'm so grateful to be here and I love my life.
Even that. Mm-hmm. That story will make you happy for a moment, will make you feel good for a couple of moments, but it's not real. It's still in the dream. You can have a beautiful lover in your dream, and it'll be a beautiful and wonderful thing while the dream is happening, but it won't inform you about what happens after the dream. It won't last. It's the problem in this world. You can go find beautiful lovers, but add 50 years to them, add 60 years to them, add 100 years to them. Certainly somewhere in there, the beauty is going to diminish. Right? And so we're looking for that one thing that is reflected in beauty that came from us. And I tell people there was a woman came, her husband had passed away 2 years earlier. She simply could not overcome that. We're way past time. Anybody online that wants to, anybody anywhere wants to go, you can go. I'm happy to sit here though forever. I don't mind at all. But if you need to go, don't feel like that it'll be an offense if you need to go. Anyone. I'll stop the recorder though, so we don't have a 4-hour recording.